play will go under review.
Happy Tuesday evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being here for this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa, and you can find me on Twitter/X at show_DeRosa. Tonight's tagline was pretty obvious, Josh Palmer, because it is free agency and the Bills have made a swath of different moves from extensions to individual free agent signings, re-signings, and so much more information that we got to know about in the past 48 hours. And I'm very excited to talk about it with all of you and my guest tonight, Mr. David Tilton, one half of the Air Raid Hour, someone I love getting on the show, friend of the network. David, welcome. How you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. I mean, it was a slow go for a little while yesterday until about 3 p.m. when we started getting some news about some free agent signings today. A couple more bits of news, obviously, that we're going to get to. But look, I think this is the reality of what it's like now to be a fan of a team who, as we talked about in the studio, doesn't have a ton of glaring holes, retooling, trying to find value in a free agent market that's just seemingly every year gets more and more out of control with the contracts and the dollars. So it's just wild to see some of the contracts that come out every year. And each year it just seems like it keeps getting more and more crazy. So, yeah.
Oh, definitely. The market is so broken. I mean, even for the receiving class this year that we were going into free agency even said like wasn't stellar by any stretch. Even like, and not to downplay who's been signed, like, because I'll get to our signing in a little while, but it's more just like the value that you're seeing a lot of these receivers who you could consider B tier, even C tier, is kind of crazy. Like even the Tutu Atwell contract that he got, I was not expecting that money at all. It was very, very like, oh, wow. So it's going to be like that this year. But yeah, we talked about this a little bit offline, David, and actually real quick, joining us in the chat right now, your responsibility, you have a job to do. That is going to be to break any news to us if we don't happen to see it already, if we don't catch it. People in the chat, don't lie, first and foremost. Good etiquette about it, because if someone says, oh my God, they just traded for Trey Hendrickson, and that didn't happen, that would be mean. Don't be mean, be nice. But no, just let us know if you see anything that we might not have gotten to, and we'll be happy to talk about it here live. But David, yeah, that's a great thing you bring up. And we talked about this a little bit offline. The discourse around free agency for the Bills, and just opening up with this, and I'll pitch it back to you, but it feels like every year we kind of have this reset of expectations for what this team is really going to do. And every year the offseason is typically prefaced with Brandon Beane saying, don't expect too much. I'm not going to spend crazy amounts of money. I'm going to spend reasonable amounts of money, and I'm going to just try and put the roster together as best as I can before the draft. And everyone kind of hears it, sees it, and goes, okay. And then it's almost like Christmas, where like your parents tell you they're not going to get you that gift, and you're like, they're not going to get me that gift. Only this time, Brandon Beane really doesn't actually get you that gift, because he's usually pretty transparent about, if I have to make the move, I will, but also it has to be reasonable. And this offseason, specifically this free agency cycle, it's kind of what it's been. It's just been reasonable moves, like contracts you either expected or the value you kind of expected to get for raising players, but not anything astronomical like a Myles Garrett trade or a Max Crosby trade. And people kind of talk themselves into it, like you told me offline, and I'll pitch it back to you. Just talk to me about what your expectations were really going into this free agency cycle relative to kind of the narrative. Brandon, I see your comment. Relative to kind of the narrative that, you know, maybe got stirred up from just fan base or really false expectations compared to what Brandon Beane really said.
Yeah, I mean, you can compare this to a couple different things too, right? It's like going into the season, like it's like, oh, you expect to win the Super Bowl. And like, yes, only one of 32 teams actually will win the Super Bowl. And even like going into the playoffs, the Bills had obviously only like a, one in however many chance to win the Super Bowl, even though we're in the playoffs. So it's like when you start to kind of talk yourselves into these moves about like trading for a Trey Hendrickson or trading for a Myles Garrett, they sound great, right? And if they happen, you're super pumped about it. But the likelihoods of those happening were always going to be low, right? I mean, talked about it a couple weeks ago. Like Garrett's contract was very difficult to get out of for both the Browns, and it would have been difficult for an accepting team also to work through that. We always thought, or at least I always thought, given how much cap space the Raiders had, that they were certainly going to try to do everything they could to retain Crosby, and they did. So I never really thought he was like a super realistic option. And then there's Trey Hendrickson, right, who is going into the last year of his contract. The Bengals trying to work, salary cap to kind of fit T. Higgins into the future. But also, like, do the Bengals really want to give away Trey Hendrickson on his contract year for probably not going to get a ton for him at age 30 as far as draft pick compensation is concerned? And their defense really wasn't good last year. So why would they give away or trade away their best defensive player? So these things were always not likely to happen. And it's sometimes hard because there is a mountain of free agents out there, right? And a lot of times what happens, especially on social media or wherever, is we end up talking about like the tip, right? The Everest peak of the free agent class. And we don't talk about everyone else. And I know you've been producing for Eric and Anthony. They've been doing a great job kind of saying like, hey, here are some guys that could fit what the Bills look for based on the trends, based on the film we've watched over the years. These are the types of the guys that we could see the Bills going after. And they certainly weren't inactive, right? Brandon Beane did make moves. And I also believe that there were probably moves out there that he was in on or phone calls he made to other teams that we just aren't going to know about, that we don't know how close he may have been on some of these other things as well, or some of these other players. So you see the end result and you kind of, sometimes they do a really good job on the embedded series, right? Taking you behind the scenes and things of that nature. But that's one area, free agency, you rarely get to see the behind the scenes on kind of what really happens, because you don't really want to show your hand on what you're really doing behind the scenes, especially in free agency.
I agree with that. And it's a process that, again, I feel like it's almost, I don't want to call it a good problem to have, because obviously you want to have more money to be able to make some of these more dynamic players come to your roster and stay there long term. And I would absolutely love it if there was a realistic path for the Bills financially to go get Myles Garrett or to go get Max Crosby. And I was one of those people that was willing to see that trade through if it was for even just a first round pick next year, this year, whatever. And however you make it work, you make it work. But I'm also a believer that the roster that you have now, the team that you have now, and the position you are in, despite it not being, a swath of cap space that you're capable of using, you did just go to the AFC Championship with a roster that is, good enough to get you there. And you just added to a roster that's good enough to get you there. And when you talk about youth infusion and the draft coming up, I feel like the best course of action, if you are unable to make a move that's as explosive, that's as impactful as getting a Crosby, a Garrett, is raise your floor as much as you can. And if you can do so, then the draft is how you compound on that. And it's the way that I want to really exist as a franchise, because so often you see a lot of money get dished out that just simply doesn't pan out the way you think it would. And a lot of people buy into the hype of every year. And Greg's made this point. A lot of people have made this point, but you talk about the hype of a free agency signing relative to what actually happens. And it's cool to see your team spend the money and get the free agent and see the graphic and have them come to your team. But so often does it not work out the way you thought, or every signing doesn't work out the way you wanted it to relative to how many you thought would stay on the roster, who would be a contributor, and so on and so forth. So just narratives about it get exhausting. But
I would also say, when it comes to football in particular, right, when it comes to free agency, like, unless it's a quarterback and maybe in rare cases like a super elite rare type of player, like, we have to remember there's 11 guys on offense, 11 guys on defense. It's a 53-man roster when it comes to game, like your final, like, individual free agents. I think in football, like, I'm not going to underscore how important they are, but I think relative to free agency in, let's say, the NBA, it's less impactful in football, because unless it's a quarterback, like I said, because so many things have to go right for that signing to work out for you, right? They have to fit with what the team wants to do. They have to avoid injury. They have to perform to not just their prior performance, which is typically how NFL contracts are given out. Like, you're paying a guy for essentially what he's already done in most cases and not what you think he's going to do. And that's just the reality. And yes, you like to think you're paying for what he's going to do, and that's why you give him the contract. But in reality, you're paying for what he's done, and there's no guarantee that that player is going to continue to do that because of just how fluid and nuanced and random football can be as a sport. So anyway, Reggie Gilliam re-signed. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to get to that, but I agree with you completely, Till. And it's a thing where, again, you want it to work out. We're so optimistic, but even look at the Vaughn contract too. Like, we were so hyped about Von Miller, and granted, I think it was panning out the way we wanted it to, but sometimes it doesn't work out the way you hope, and that's honestly why I'm a little more hesitant to just drop the bag on every free agent you see, and rather just find the people that are functional. Again, that floor raising group, it's cheaper. It's something that can be sustained year after year, despite your cap situation. And again, if you find hits in the draft, now your depth is just really solid, and that's a great world to be in. But let's get on to the fun part. And that's the free agent signings we've had. And we'll start with the most recent news, which as of tonight, literally over the past hour and a half, we got Ty Johnson and Reggie Gilliam. Reggie Gilliam moments ago announced by Mike Garafolo that he's coming back on a 1-year, $2 million contract. Ty Johnson on a 2-year, $5 million contract, which that is great value for the production you got for Ty Johnson. I'm a huge fan. Till, we'll start with these two before we get to the external signings. What do you think about bringing these two back?
I mean, to me, these were always okay. I talked about this on Air Raid Hour last night too. Out of Mack Hollins, Reggie Gilliam, Ty Johnson, to me, it always felt like Mack Hollins was the most likely to leave the Bills, because the Bills really need to kind of, do something with that receiver room differently. I didn't think that it, spending money on a guy like that necessarily, yes, we love the vibes, but the vibes aren't everything. Reggie Gilliam was an important piece to this running game, especially down the stretch. They were using him more in that running game, and James Cook really took off, obviously, this year with the help of Reggie Gilliam kind of leading the way. And the way that the Bills use him as sort of part of that sort of power running game that the Bills really established this past year with how good that offensive line was, Reggie Gilliam in the mix. Special teamer, obviously, we know that his contributions to special teams are huge, and Sean McDermott in his past has always been a big special teams guy as far as how he constructs the roster. So that one, a no-brainer. I think it's a good deal for Reggie Gilliam. I don't think he's going to go into a different situation that's going to be better for him personally. And then Ty Johnson, 2 years, $5 million. I mean, think that's a home run again for the Bills. 2 years kind of gives them also some flexibility on kind of how they're going to handle the future of the running back room as well. We know the situation with James Cook's up in the air. I'm not saying Ty Johnson's going to be the running back one in 2026, by the way. I'm not saying that, but it gives them options now also with the 2 5th-round additional comp picks they have to go after a running back maybe in the draft. But it gives them those core 3 guys back for 2025 that were so successful in 2024 with Cook, Ray Davis going into his second year, and now Ty Johnson back. And again, said on Twitter as well, maybe unfair to just call him a third down back, right? Because he does run the ball effectively. He does not just catch passes out of the backfield. He goes down the field and catches passes as well. And he just always made plays in big spots, I thought. And it's really nice to have him back. So for me, these were 2 no-brainers that the Bills, again, makes sense. And now they have the ultimate flexibility when it comes to not just going into the 2025 season, but into the draft as well for beyond 2025. So good moves for the Bills right here.
Yep, I'm in lockstep with you. I think they're great moves, and just 2 core pieces to not only your locker room, because I think I would label each of these guys as just people that have been here a few years and really good camaraderie with the rest of your staff and your coaching staff, your offensive coordinator, really everybody, Josh Allen especially. But on the field production, and with Reggie Gilliam, the numbers don't reflect it. And Ty Johnson being a third down back and a pass protector, it's not going to look as flashy. But Ty is just the role he has and the value you have gotten him for what the output has been from Ty Johnson has just been tremendous over the past couple of years since he kind of came alive in the back half of 2023. And then last season, we were talking about him becoming really an integral part of just galvanizing your running game and being an alternate option and someone who's been a reliable receiving back. This was well deserved, and honestly, less than I kind of thought Johnson was going to command, just given what he was able to do and what teams might have been able to see, but maybe the limitations of his role, despite him being what I think is better than his role, were maybe enough to generate a team-friendly contract, and that's what you got here. And I'm very happy to have him back. And, I could have understood and kind of accepted if they decided like, hey, not that he's terribly long in the tooth, because he's not, but maybe this is a really deep running back class and we can go get somebody to just replicate that role. But even with running backs, it's something where they still have to develop all those components. And Ty Johnson is just here now, really reliable, able to help you in that pass blocking, able to, kind of have the route running prowess that pairs with his really good rushing ability and his speed, but also the chemistry he has with Josh Allen. And, people have cited the Denver Broncos playoff game, that touchdown, and some of his off-script moments with Josh, which I think are a really crucial part to keeping this offense going, even if, you do have those same issues when it comes to, well, the team's getting defended well and they can't really beat the man, so they have to go off script and we need someone to be alive down the field, ready to go. Ty Johnson's really good in that role. So I am really happy to have him back. And I am, I'm ready to see 2 more years of Ty Johnson with Josh Allen, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, but the framework and the foundation laid out for if the team, whatever they decide to do with James Cook, whether that's retains him, where that's moves on from him, and does eventually end up bringing in a running back that they would deem their new bell cow or their new running back of the future. I mean, having him here, if it's something where James Cook moves on as early as the draft, if there's a chance they trade him, or even next season, you just have that consistent piece of that foundation of the running back room that's there for you, that could still have that same role and still be a spark plug if you need him to be, especially if you have someone new that might not be as quick or as chemistry ridden as, James Cook has been with Josh Allen. And if Ray Davis doesn't pan out, then this is still a reliable option to turn to. So huge fan of bringing him back. And then as far as Reggie Gilliam goes, I love fullbacks. I love Reggie Gilliam in this offense with the physicality and the power that they run with. When you can get him going downhill to set a block, he can do it. I honestly feel like Gilliam is someone I want to see them utilize a little bit more in the passing game, just to be devious and just really hammer down that open field aggression. And again, being able to hurt people when the ball is in your hands, and just any yards you could get by being stubborn, because he is, despite just being a fullback, also has tight end history. Like, it's a guy that I want to see a little more involved beyond a blocking role. I'm not saying, please don't take that as me saying let him be top 3 in receptions on this team. I do not mean it that way. I just mean like, let's get a little more versatile with the fullback and some of those pre-snap looks you can have with him. But always good to have Gilliam back. Again, he was never going to command a lot of money, so it seemed like a no-brainer. It's literally $2 million. Chump change. I'm happy to have both of these guys back. Tilt, any final thoughts on these 2 players before we move on to the other signings we had from yesterday?
I would say on one last note on Ty Johnson, right, is like, he saw the type of production he could have in a role where he kind of thrived with the Bills. And like, you don't know if he goes somewhere else, if he can kind of recreate that magic, right? And if he would even be guaranteed the same type of snap counts. And like, yes, if he was going to go sign somewhere, maybe they were going to promise him a role. But like, the role he has here with Josh Allen, that chemistry, and the best production he's had in his career. Let's not forget the Jets kind of screwed him over a couple years ago when they got rid of him. I think that left a bad taste in his mouth, and I think this Bills organization has treated him well. So also that plays into it as well. So yeah, glad to have him back.
Definitely. Yeah, he was a revelation. I mean, when you got him, it was his arc kind of reminds me a lot of Isaiah McKenzie, kind of someone you brought in as like a journeyman in the middle of the season, and you were like, all right, I've seen the name before. What could this bring us? Like, maybe there's a role for him if you're desperate. And then like with McKenzie, they got him going a little bit, and you saw the speed kind of flash on the field, and they had a nice little gadget role for him. And you're like, yeah, I could rock with this for for a role for long term, like something super gimmicky. And then it continued to expand because the play was decent enough where you could justify it. Then ultimately it didn't really pan out the way you wanted to when you gave him the slot role, but you got him to a level where he was relevant and you had him for a few years. And with Ty Johnson, it's kind of a similar arc. Like, you get him mid-season, he's kind of floating around, you're trying to find a place for him, and then just come up against the Jets of all teams to have that big touchdown run and the explosiveness, and you're like, let's see what we could do. And the role just slowly expanded. And then you bring him back on a 1-year contract because you're thinking like, all right, this was fun. Let's see. And then, okay, he's doing it again and he's becoming even more of a focal point. And now it's like, you got him back. It's going to be probably the same role in my eyes. And I'm happy about it. I really like keeping these foundational pieces in this offense, but for what he's getting paid, I think his impact is significant. What he was able to do for them this year, significant. And I gotta pull this up. Brandon, you're distracting me. But Wendy's or Taco Bell tonight? I saw you say, Dave, Wendy's. Yeah, just go with the Wendy's, dude. Honestly, that sounds much better right now. Like burger, good fries combo. Okay, back to the conversation. So one other thing I wanted to talk to you about were the external signings we had, and it's really just two main guys, unless you want to talk about Darrington Evans, but I'll go for the two most relevant guys, which I know that you and Judge covered yesterday, in Josh Palmer and Michael Hoecht. Josh Palmer, they got earlier in the day, Hoecht a little later on. He addresses, kind of the depth, the floor of the wide receiver room that, could use someone with this profile. Again, not a typical burner, but a route running specialist, a more tactile weapon, which, is good because they need these guys that are capable of separating against man coverage. You had someone like a few years ago, Stephon Diggs, who was capable of doing that. Then they lost that and they struggled to kind of replicate it. And now they have an opportunity to find a player who is serviceable enough against man coverage to give them more flexibility and breathing room if teams decide to show them those looks. So, David, what were your thoughts on signing Josh Palmer, and where do you think he's going to fill in with this wide receiver room? What do you really think the role will look like for him this season?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Josh Palmer fits in sort of the room as far as like the Bills don't really have the alpha type of guy, right? They have Shakir. I get that. Going into the last season, they're top four going into the season were Shakir, rookie Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, who was banged up, and then Mack Hollins, who was kind of viewed more as a special teamer. Now going into this season, they have Keon Coleman second year, Shakir, a healthy, hopefully Curtis Samuel, and now Josh Palmer, who does bring that ability to beat man coverage into the room. It feels like a similar move to what they did at the trade deadline last year, to when they brought in Amari Cooper, as far as like his ability to beat man coverage. I think Josh Palmer profiles a little bit similar to Amari Cooper, to be honest. I think he can get down the field maybe a little bit better on contested catches, but he's still only 25 years old. The Bills are making this signing, I think, based on sort of some of his past production with the Chargers. He's never really been a 100 target or an alpha type of guy, and I think that's going to be fine for what the Bills need for him to do. And so I think he knows he's coming in here into a role that he's been comfortable in, right? As far as like, hey, I've never had to be like the focal point of an offense, and I still maybe don't have to be, which is fine because he's comfortable with that. Learned from Keenan Allen all those years. That's a great mentor to have. And now comes into a situation where he brings something to the room that the Bills don't exactly have now, with Amari Cooper likely not back after this signing. So I would say it fits what they need. Some of the advanced metrics on his separation look good. I will say this to fans, though. I will say, and really for me too, it's like, this isn't like, we shouldn't expect like, oh, this isn't like a wide receiver one type of sign. Like, the money looks like a lot, and I get that. But when you look at Tutu Atwell getting $10 million, when you look at De'Ami Brown getting a $10 million up to $12 million deal, and you see then Josh Palmer getting $12 million AAV, which really probably is going to end up amounting to like a 2-year deal where the Bills can get out of it, likely with minimal dead cap, I would assume. Again, we don't have the full details yet. It makes sense to me, right, as something that they would want to add. Now, you can quibble over whether or not they should have allocated resources to other positions, whatever, but I think for the market and what the Bills needed, a guy that will come into the room and kind of fit well, right? Because that's what you're also looking for, is guys who can fit into your room. It checks those boxes, right? I'm not telling you he's like the best receiver in the world. I'm not telling you he's the worst, right? I'm just saying he fits what they need. I don't know that they're going to be done yet at this position. We'll see what happens in the draft, but it does fill a need. And really, even though it looks like it not breaking the bank on a guy like this.
Yeah. And I will say that it's not breaking the bank. This is just the skewed market for wide receivers. But Also, I think that when you look at how this offense treats wide receivers in general, as far as what their roles are, they're very specific. They want guys that are capable of wearing a certain hat, whether that's being kind of more of a power profile receiver with, physicality and the ability to work at the catch point, like Keon Coleman, someone who is a bit more of a middle of the field slot option, whether that's Curtis Samuel or maybe something of a hybrid like a Shakir Samuel, or someone that's a bit more tactical like Josh Palmer. They want to have the versatility. And like you have said, he is someone that fits that profile, someone that they really needed because ultimately they struggled against man coverage last season. And this is a guy who has excelled against that type of coverage in numerous ways. And I think it's not so much about the production with him as much as it's just about the profile. And I'm very comfortable having him just be that role player. And I'm very comfortable bringing in a guy to just be a role player because same thing that I said before to what I'll say to this and our next player that we'll cover, it's all about raising your floor. And this is a guy who absolutely raises your floor. He has never put up earth-shattering numbers. His best season looking here, he had 769 yards on 72 receptions, averaged about 10.7 yards per reception, 3 total touchdowns. Not overwhelming numbers, but that's good enough to be productive in a Buffalo Bills offense that wants to spread the ball around. So if they are going to do that this year, then find me a guy who just specializes in that role and I'll be comfortable with it. And this is that guy. So I'm perfectly okay with the signing. Did I think it was a little rich at the time? Sure. It did seem like much, but seeing how it's breaking down and the fact that at most 2-year deals or most 3-year deals probably give you that out, I'll rock with it. I'm willing to see how it goes as far as the money goes. And if it is a fair return on investment, because I know people are a bit snake bitten by the Curtis Samuel contract, but I'm very comfortable with this. And the age is a big thing for me too, Tilt. The fact that you got a 25-year-old receiver on the open market who has shown flashes of brilliance, again, hasn't put it all together, but has had his moments where he can win down the field and create real separation. It's a skill set you needed. It's a profile you needed, and I'm very happy about it. And I am willing to see how he does in an offense that maybe isn't done adding to that wide receiver room, especially now that Mack Hollins is gone and maybe you don't look internally to find the void or to fill the void at that spot. So we'll have to see. But any final thoughts on Josh Palmer or anything you want to add before we move on to the next free agent?
I will say this. I don't think it stops the Bills from taking a wide receiver or maybe even 2 in the draft. The question would be when. And I think the question of when has a lot to do with the positional group we're about to talk to with Michael Hoecht and just generally the defensive line. I think people are very, very concerned there. So let's go to Michael Hoecht, I guess, and start that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And the D line is something that they're going to address. I don't even say I want them to address. They have to address it, right? And they have needs at edge rusher and they have needs at defensive tackle. But I will say that the Michael Hoecht signing for me was one that I was happy about for the reason of he is just a Swiss Army man on that defensive line. And, this past year when they brought in Dewan Smoot, you were kind of hoping to get that out of him. And then you had the injury midseason and you never really see it live up to its potential. But there were moments for Smoot where he generated pressure from different spots, whether that was out wide as an edge rusher, whether that was in the interior. And it was a cool concept. And I feel like they wanted to get a little bit younger at the spot and they wanted to find someone who was just athletically capable, but also someone that can wear those hats and also cover. And that's what you get in Michael Hoecht. He is a very versatile player. The Rams used him in a variety of ways. There was a literal video clip of this man actually having good quality coverage on DK Metcalf on a slant, which is the funniest thing ever. And I made a joke in our Discord today, Till. I was like, you got the tired, which is Cam Lewis is the backup nickel, but the inspired is Michael Hoecht as your backup nickel corner. So I'm just going to start that narrative. That's our backup nickel, guys. We did it. But I really, really like Hoecht for what he could bring to this D line, for the versatility, not just from him and where you can line him up, but for the fronts you could present to an offense and how that changes the dynamic with maybe if you want to send, whether it's one of the odd mirror fronts and have him involved with that in a different spot. You have to account for where this guy's lining up because he has the juice to create pressure. And I really like it for that reason, especially if we stay on the narrative of raising the floor, adding more youth infusion in the draft to the D line with a defensive, whether it's a defensive tackle, a one tackle run stuffer, or going and getting that edge rusher and letting him kick inside, even though he might be a little undersized for it now at a consistent basis. I like it. I'm really happy about this move. This is one where I was like, yeah, let's go. I see the vision. But Tilt, back to you. What do you think about Michael Hoyt on this defense?
Yeah, and like I know some people, like I spin in the comments, I see he's asking about like, do we overpay? This is one where we do know the contract details. I don't remember the specific numbers. Greg put them in the Discord, but this was definitely one where the cap hits were like fairly low for 25 and 26, and there was quite an easy out, I believe, for 2027. So
Mhm.
it seemed like this was a very team friendly contract on the surface. It's like, obviously up to 24 million, I believe it was, but in
Yeah,
reality,
just real quick, the cap hit for 2025 is 4.4 million or
Mhm.
4.5 million. His 2026 cap hit at his age 29 season would be 7.5 million. Then your potential out in 2027 only gives you about 2.6 million dead cap. So
Okay, so
there's
there you go. And how much cap savings? I don't know. Probably about 6 to 8. I'm guessing with a two
total
million dollars.
deal for the 2027. It would be 2 year, 14.6 mil.
Okay, so you'd be looking at about 6 million in real cap savings if you got out of
Mhm.
that after 2 years. So it's a good problem to have if you're the Bills because he excels and he ascends and he is a contributor. Then it's a no brainer that he's there for his 2027 season and his age 30 season. And again, a guy who is only 27 years old. Both of these guys, Josh Palmer and Michael Hoyt, are just coming off their first contracts in the NFL. So the Brandon Beane's getting these guys in their mid 20s, eyeing these guys as ascending players, and that's where you can find value in the free agent market. Yes, it's a risk. Yes, you are taking the risk that these guys will continue to ascend, but sometimes you kind of have to do that. And when you already have a really good team, it sometimes makes sense to do those types of things because you're not necessarily hanging your hat on team's success is totally reliant on these guys, but they can be significant contributors to your team in 2025. Hoyt's versatility is very intriguing. They can move him around. I do think the Bills defense needs to be a little bit more unpredictable, especially in
Mm.
big moments. And that's a guy that can potentially bring some of that for you, some 3-3-5 alignments, some different linebackers you can put on the field, different things that you can do now. It's going to be up to Bobby Babich to kind of think about how to use guys like that. But certainly something that makes sense to me. The Bills use a rotation as it is, so you don't have to expect this guy to play more than 50% of the snaps anyway. So I like the move. We'll see what kind of his playing weight. If the Bills want to kind of keep him at where he was with the Rams last year, I think that makes sense. He was effective doing that. We saw some of the struggles they had was kind of messing with AJ Epinessa's body composition. I say leave Michael Hoyt where he is. That body
Mhm.
type he had with the Rams last year, I think at that weight and sort of body type will work well for the Bills. And by the way, I think this guy was like a 9 point something Raz as well. So
Yeah.
he's an athletic guy too. So there you go.
As Andre says here, Asante Samuel Jr. signing soon, winky face. If that is the fake account that had been for whatever reason specifically reporting about the Bills signing him, and I have no idea why. Yes, that is a fake account. I was very excited when I first saw it because I do like Asante Samuel Jr. I hope he still signs, but if that is based off that one account, I can't even remember the guy's name. That is a parody account, and unfortunately, we got. So that yeah, listen, it's again, I'm not looking at Michael Hoyt as being your primary edge rusher, but I like someone that's just a tactical piece. I like getting that in free agency when you don't have the crazy amount of cap to spend. Again, if we're talking about not being able to physically afford the trade for one of the premier edge rushers, then you got to go with whatever the market has for you. And this is an option. And there's still veteran pass rushers available that you probably could get on relatively fair deals to complement that and still maintain your position in the draft and plan in the draft. And for Michael Hoyt, where you talk about the Bills that love having that kind of amoeba positionless vibe to them, where you got guys that are going to play multiple roles that might line up, like, for example, Cole Bishop, even though they've had him be kind of a deeper field guy, he also gets up closer to the box and maybe at times could even be one of those dime backers. For Michael Hoyt, it's maybe we'll kick him outside. Maybe we'll have him on the interior. Maybe he lines up even as a linebacker in certain looks, but we know he's capable of doing it all. And I want to see it. And the athleticism for him is a thing that I really am drawn to because even though it's not everything, as we have seen with freak RAS scores that usually for some players just translate to absolutely nothing. It's a good component to have if you're talking about asking someone to cover if they are, a defensive lineman that just needs to drop a few yards back. And I'm okay with that. And again, The value is there. It's a very reasonable contract. And what you are getting is a functional piece. And that's all this is about right now. And if they decide to do some sort of splash move down the line, then that's even better because all you did was fortify your depth further. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what they do every single season. And here they are with another piece that serves that purpose. So I'm pleased with it. Will it work out? Like anything, we will just have to see. Maybe it crashes and burns, or maybe it's the two best free agent signings in Bills history and we are just overwhelmed. Or most likely, it's something in the middle where fans will love it or hate it, depending on what their intrinsic value of said player and said production is. So basically, every offseason with every single player ever. David, any other thoughts on Michael Hoecht before we carry on to the re-signings that the Bills have had?
Yeah, just final thought. For me, this feels a lot like the Connor McGovern signing back in 2023 when he signed a 3-year, $23 million deal or whatever it was. You were betting on his traits. You were betting on his physical profile. He came in to start as a guard, and then we saw what he ascended to when he became the center last year. You know, that season in 2023, that was like kind of like the Bills' premier signing, obviously before that during that free agency period. And so to me, the Michael Hoecht signing feels a little bit like that. Like, guy coming into his second contract, age 27, you are getting him to be kind of a chess piece on the defensive line. Maybe you figure out over the first year where he best fits, like you did with Connor McGovern. And obviously we saw Mitch Morse leave, but you're betting on that ascension again with a guy like Michael Hoecht. And so I do feel like there's some parallels there between the signing they did with Connor McGovern at the beginning of 2023 and this signing now with Michael Hoecht at the beginning of 2025.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to see a lot of him, even if they decide to go defensive line heavy in the draft too. Like, this guy again is what I would deem the Smoot role, unless you go find someone who is an all over the place defensive line prospect that maybe has played on the interior and on the outside a bit. But I feel like you're going to see a lot of Michael Hoecht, and you always want that pick me up guy, whether it's someone has to sub out and you feel like he could play like a de facto 3-tech role or something. I like the pick. I like the signing just for that reason. Like, I feel comfortable knowing that you got a guy that just can really mess with you and what you're seeing pre to post. And you got to think, like, in your division with some guys that are maybe easier to fool, that have recently got signed to a New York team, then that's a really good thing to have if you're talking about divisional games too. Just a random tidbit there. But yeah, I mean, David, I want to move on now to actually, before we get to the re-signings, let's talk about the comp picks, because that was other news that broke today. And now the Bills are officially going to go into this draft with 10 total picks. You got your first round pick. You have your 2 in the second. No third round yet, because they're probably going to end up getting one at some point because Brandon Beane likes doing that. And then they have an abundance in the later rounds. I believe it's 3 6-round picks, 2 5ths, 2 4ths, if I have that correct off the top of my head. So, I mean, we kind of saw this coming. We saw the amount coming. It's something that we speculated for a while. As I just refreshed Twitter to see Trent Sherfield, Buffalo Bills legend, is now a Denver Bronco. Congratulations, Trent. 2 years, $8 million. Okay. Was not expecting that. But anyways, compensatory picks, again, a value we all saw coming. Your thoughts really on the draft capital, and what do you think, as of right now, if you had to just say Brandon Beane's draft strategy, what do you think it's going to be? Do you feel like it's key to move up this year, or are you feeling more of a trade back and let's just stack it and try to get as many as possible?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously you have the first rounder and 2 second rounders. Yes, you signed Michael Hoecht. You really haven't done anything of significance to truly address the interior, I would say, although we know he's a chess piece that can move inside, but really for what the Bills need on the interior. And you haven't gone out and addressed the secondary in any meaningful way either so far in free agency. So as it stands right now, it would seem like the Bills would probably be eyeing those 2 position groups. And what I would say, as far as like the chances of players making the team, 10 picks, like the Bills really have 2 main position groups right now, the defensive line and the secondary, where I think that is the path to likeliest chance of draft picks making the team. Yes, a wide receiver could still. Yes, I get that. A running back as well. I think Brandon Beane's going to trade up. I think what you're going to see is I think what I hope is a convergence of early draft picks as far as day 1, day 2. So what that means is I think you could see a little bit of a trade back from 30, moving back into like the early second round, like we saw him do with Keon Coleman last year. But I also think you can then use that ammo that you have with those 2 4ths, 2 5ths, 3 6 to also move up, maybe get yourself an extra 4th or maybe even another 3rd and kind of converge sort of in sort of the middle of this draft, and where you can concentrate and bring in, 5 or 6, maybe 7 impactful guys onto this roster that come in somewhere between late round 1, early round 2, and sort of, mid to late round 5 is kind of the sweet spot I think would be great for the Bills to come out of this with like 7 picks, and notably, as it stands right now, a couple of those picks on the defensive line, secondary, and then obviously throw in a receiver, running back, whatever you want to do there. But I think I'd love to see it kind of converge a bit is the word I'm going to use into those middle rounds.
Yeah, I'm so torn on what I'd prefer because I'm a pick hoarder. I love doing my stupid little mock drafts and trading back and getting like 38 picks because PFF system is so broken, and you could trade like from pick 30 to pick 36.
I used to be like you. I want fewer picks and higher impact picks.
I agree with
where
that
I am
too.
now.
I'm not opposed to that strategy either. I want to stress if that's the route you want to take, because I'm realistic about this roster, right? If you have 10 draft picks, as someone pointed out, I got to find the comics that just had it. But do you think that 10 players are going to make the roster with 10 picks? Yeah, they're not going to add 10 players to their active roster. There's only so many holes to fill, so many places to start. What I will say is when I talk about the Bills kind of trying to sustain the quote unquote window or the youth infusion of their roster, I do like having the abundance of picks and kind of splitting it where you have a portion to start or at the very least be backups and be on your active roster, and a portion to develop, kind of like they did in last year's draft where you saw that first half be impact guys like Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop, Dwayne Carter, obviously pre-injury Dwayne Carter. And then that back half of the draft was devoted to just filling up the O-line with some prospects and like Daquan Hardy as a backup nickel corner who could eventually emerge. I don't hate that strategy, but I do think, like anything, it's going to be how the board falls relative to what the roster really looks like after free agency and what the biggest needs remaining are. Because I'll say, if I see like Derek Harmon fall to pick number 25 and they're at pick 30, and they have an opportunity to go up and get him, like, I'm not waiting because that man's not making it to pick 30, or even like Kenneth Grant or one of these guys. If you could go up and get that penetrating one tech, you go up and get him. And I'm for that. I don't hate that. It's more so if those guys, like those really big need, perfect fit guys, go before it's even in a realistic trade up range, then I'm okay with trading back, because I do think that the needs that you see the Bills having right now, even after free agency, will likely still be there to some varying degree. And then you just trade back and try to get that 3rd round pick back and stack the youth infusion and just bring as many players that you see fit as possible. Because even then, you trade back from 30, get a 3rd round pick back, and then you're still talking about having 4 picks, 4 players that could still make an impact. It's just a matter of scouting them appropriately. But with how deep the edge rusher, D-line, corner class is, I'm okay with that. But either option works for me. For me personally, I think the more realistic one that we'll see is Beane trading out of the 1st round again, but maybe not a significant drop off, maybe something akin to like pick 33. 3 picks back, because maybe their eye is completely set on corner, and someone like Trey Amos or Darian Porter or like one of those super athletic free quarterback prospects is there for them. Or maybe they get lucky and a guy like Tyreek Williams falls down to like the later 30s and they can go still get that one tech and try to develop him. Like, it's very up in the air, obviously, but I'm cool with either or. I guess it just depends on what the 20s look like, because hindsight for a lot of these things is 2020, but there are certain players I look at now and I'm like, man, they really could have gotten up and got him, right? And it would have made so much sense as a schematic fit, even like BTJ last year. Granted, I wasn't the biggest fan of him, but it stings.
That's the one that stings. I think there were a lot of Bills fans that actually like Brian Thomas Jr., but you also, it takes a team to be willing to trade as well, right? And Brandon Beane has to be willing to take that risk to give up, premium picks to move up that far in last year's draft. And so we'll see what happens this year. I kind of like where the Bills are at 30 right now. I think there's going to be multiple options for them. And I think you're right. You could maybe see a slight trade down. I think if you see a bigger trade down, like from 30 to say like the late 30s, you could add a 3rd round pick that way by moving down that far. Like obviously you'd get, pick 39, 40, 41 and add a 3rd rounder. Or you could use your extra 4th and extra 5th to move up into the 3rd and kind of keep pick 30. There are a lot of ways this could play out for the Bills. And I think it ultimately comes down to what the Bills end up doing with that 1st pick. Do they trade down? Do they keep it? Etc. So that first round pick and those 2 seconds are huge. A bit unfortunate that the Vikings were so good last year after we thought they were going to be trash, because I really thought they were not going to be a good football team in 2024. But kudos to Kevin O'Connell, man. He had that team ready. And so it is what it is, but it's still 2 second rounders. That's still super valuable. And it's going to be exciting. And again, this is just the first wave of free agency, right? The Bills may be able to find some defensive tackle out there, Dante Fowler Jr. at edge out there. Like, there are guys out there that they could still go out and find to kind of solidify things before the draft.
And just personal preference, I'd rather them find like a stopgap edge rusher before a stopgap DT at this point. I'm not saying I don't want them to draft an edge rusher at all, because I'd love it if there was a really good profile guy on the board. But I'm at a point now where I'm a big believer in building from the interior out, because when you get a true disruptor on your interior, I think that elevates everything by default. And the edge rushers you bring in just have to be good enough to really capitalize on that, because it's so hard to just lose focus on like, let's talk about the Jeffrey Simmons of the league, or even like the Quinnen Williams, or now the Jalen Carters, who literally I would even say Jalen Carter alone added so much money to what Josh Sweat and Milton Williams
absolutely
made on the open market.
He did it for everybody.
Dude, he's unbelievable. And that type of player is someone that I feel, when you think about the Bills and the lack of blitz and the 4-man pressures and what they want to win with, that is the perfect guy. So if that guy you think at the very least has a profile similar to those guys falling to you in the end of the 20s, go get him. Please go get him. Because I'm telling you right now, like, I'm a Derek Harmon truther. I don't think he makes it to 30 at this point, but if that man can be in that range, he's perfect for this defense, and he's my favorite DT in this class. But I brought this up from Richie Fresh. Thank you so much, Richie, for your charitable super chat here. That is very nice of you. And you say, not to be that guy, but isn't Palmer the guy in a good amount of games last year at have Butterfingers and release Mack Hollins? I don't know. Now, to my knowledge, Josh Palmer's drops are low. At PFF, they got him charted at, let's see here, 4 total drops. I've seen people say he had 1, though. PFF has been weird. I don't know. I had this with Anthony a couple weeks ago where we had like completely different stats on something, but I'm looking at PFF's page. So it's probably just what they chart as a drop versus other stat sites. They have him charted at 4, but regardless, it's still not a high volume of drops in general.
PFR, Pro Football Reference also has him at 4, by the way.
Okay.
So I think
lines up. So 4.
Right.
Fantastic 4. So I'm really excited for that movie. I'll mention it any chance I get. He's sure-handed, and that's something the Bills value in this offense. So I'm not sure about Butterfingers for him. And then going to the Mack Hollins point, the Mack Hollins departure was disappointing to me, just because I am a huge fan of guys that bring vibes to the table. I think that does matter over the course of a long season where guys are getting worn out, and it's very just, oh man, like the grind of the season, the bang up nature of a season. But Mack Hollins was just the guy that got down and dirty in the blocking game and was an actual reliable target for Josh. But when I think of like the 1-for-1 trade-off of going from Mack Hollins, who's 31, to a 25-year-old Josh Palmer, who puts up similar production, I'm willing to live in that world. And look, Mack Hollins was a great 1-year rental for the Bills, but I don't think the Bills were going to give him the money that he got from the Patriots. And frankly, it's someone that even if you brought him back would probably have been on another 1 or 2 year deal anyway. And I think that the role he had in this offense, as good as he was at it on special teams, on blocking, can be replaced by someone in the draft, or even by someone who still remains on the open market. So, Till, what are your thoughts on this comment? Mack Hollins or just Josh Palmer, whatever you feel like saying?
I mean, look, Mack Hollins reunites with Josh McDaniels, where he had his best season with the Raiders as far as receptions are concerned. I get that. Like, it's somewhere where he's going to go and bring guys like Jalen Pogue, Javon Baker. Like, they have a young receiving core there. It certainly looks like he's going to have opportunity probably to get playing time as well under Mike Vrabel. So, like, I don't blame him. He probably wasn't going to get that type of money from the Bills. I think the Bills probably would have given him like a 1-year, $3 million or something like that to come back. But for him to get the 2 years, 8.4, I don't exactly know how much was guaranteed on that. But like, look, Mack Hollins is a guy that is a journeyman wide receiver in the NFL. He brings really good locker room energy, and he's going to be a guy that like every cycle is going to try to get the most bang for his buck. And I would be the same if I was him. So he's not the type of guy who's going to get that one big contract and be fine for his career. Now he's going to be fine because he keeps getting these contracts, but like, that's the type of thing that I can't blame a guy like that for going. Now, do we hope he steps on broken glass? I don't know with those bare feet, but we'll see. Some people are a little bit bitter about it. I'm not bitter. I know, like, I don't like the Patriots, whatever. Like, it's a new era of the Patriots. Like, it's a different, I feel differently about the Patriots now than I did, 10 years ago. I obviously still don't like them. But I'm not gonna like have any ill will towards Mack Hollins for going to a division team.
No, and I like this comment from Timbo. Can't blame him. Millions matter to a guy like that who hasn't gotten a big
Yep.
contract. That's a great point. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
for someone like a journeyman wide receiver, the guys that bounce around team to team and just get a different role. Like the fact that he even got to a point where he was getting 2 years, Emil, is a really nice opportunity for him. So
I think,
I'm happy for the guy.
yeah, and I think RJ makes a good point, right? It's like you could have had. Would you have rather kept Mack Hollins for 2 years, 8-9 million, or go out and sign Josh Palmer for the 36 million? Like, I can understand some of that line of thinking because it's like maybe your asset allocation could have been used elsewhere, could have been used on a corner, maybe like a Travarius Ward or a defensive lineman. But that's where we are, right? We signed Josh Palmer, so I can understand that line of thinking from RJ. I do think Josh Palmer as a receiver is going to be better than Mack Hollins, or should be, I should say. I don't know if he will, but he should be. But Mack Hollins did fit in very well with this team, so you can't discount that. And yeah, we'll see how things play out, right? But I can understand that line of thinking for sure.
Yeah, I like the asset allocation point. I think that does matter when you talk about, especially in a bloated market, trying to find corner depth. But also, I'm weird when it comes to corners on the, like, again, the reason why I want Asante Samuel, despite the season-ending injury, he's still pretty young. That was kind of my push for Palmer being one of my top guys, was just he's a younger guy. I'm okay with giving that money to Palmer just because, again, you talk about giving weapons to Josh Allen and addressing a need that was pretty pressing as far as how this offense can move the ball through the air. He does check a lot of those boxes in theory. And I think if you do actually get that flash from him that he's been showing in LA on the Chargers, no pun intended, I guess, because it's a lightning bolt, that is a very useful addition to your roster. And I think something that would be worth its weight in gold, especially when you think of what that would look like for the market he got versus what the production could potentially be for him if he does actually pan out. So that's a wait and see thing, but I'm not really upset. I mean, again, Hollins was like, I was sad just for the vibes. I'm not sad for the concept of losing him. I think you can replace that. Richie did follow up with another super chat. Thank you again, Richie. This is awesome. We appreciate you watching. Appreciate all of you watching. And he says, maybe a stretch, but do you all think Beane hasn't gotten that big edge rusher yet because the attitude is, quote unquote, we have Josh Allen? I say this to say the Eagles showed us how to beat our nemesis, quote unquote, the hump. That's a fun way to call the nickname for the Kansas City Chiefs is the hump. Till, what do you think about this comment?
I mean, it's not for a lack of trying, right? As far as like investing in the defensive line, right? Like, they signed Von Miller to that huge deal. They drafted Gregory Rousseau in the first round. They've brought in guys like Mario Addison in the past. They brought in guys like Quentin Jefferson. They brought in, they signed AJ Epinesa. They signed Leonard Floyd last year. I mean, AJ Epinesa was a second round pick. They go out now and go get a Michael Hoecht. Like they've tried, right? They've tried and they've swung, but they just haven't hit. They just haven't hit on a lot of these defensive line signings and or draft picks. Like Greg Rousseau looks like the best one of the bunch, and Vaughn situation obviously unfortunate because he was playing well until that injury, right? And you just wonder what could have been. So I don't think it's for a lack of trying from Brandon Beane. I just don't think they've really hit the home run yet, and that's. Greg Rousseau looks like a triple to me, but I don't know that it's a home run. You need a home run guy. I think that the fact that you have Josh Allen shouldn't stop you from doing that. Like the Eagles and the Chiefs, the two teams in the Super Bowls, Jalen Carter and Chris Jones, right? Look at those two guys. They're instrumental in getting those teams to where they got to. And so, and then you look at other teams who are in the playoffs who had disruptors on the interior, the LA Rams with Braden Fisk and their new defensive, these teams have made investments in the defensive line. And I think, again, Pete and I have talked about this too. Pete and Anna in the comments, like we've talked about Brandon Beane. He's made swings and they just haven't always panned out. So again, I don't think it's for a lack of trying. I just think it's for a lack of hitting.
Yeah, and a lot of teams have low hit rates until they don't. I mean, you can even look at some of the best GMs in the league at having their blunders. Look at Howie Roseman when he got Jalen Reagor in the draft that had Justin Jefferson. Like, there's blunders, right? It's just for the Bills, their unfortunate misses have been at a position that really is something they rely heavily on in their scheme. Duh, every
And
defense
those
does. But
positions are expensive to invest in
yes,
already. So it's like when you miss on them, it hurts even more.
no, absolutely. But where I think a lot about 2022 because I think it's like misguided because it's the assumption that not enough is being done. Whereas I think a lot is being done, but is it being done correctly? And that goes to that comment we had earlier about free agency expectations relative to that first day and the contracts getting signed and all the hype with that versus what actually ends up happening most of the time. And it's not to say it never works out, but
Right.
there's a lot of situations where it doesn't. And I mean,
Yep.
even the Von Miller contract, but that year they get Von Miller, they bring in Tim Settle, Daquan Jones, they bring back Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. Brandon Beane, at Von Miller's contract signing, hugged him. And there's a literal quote of him saying, "We beefed up that D line for you." Like that was his whole goal and intention. So it just didn't work out. And it's unfortunate. And that is something that you can look at Brandon Beane and say, you got to be better at this because this defensive line play has just not been good enough. And that is an integral part of how this Bills defense can really own teams and get over that hump is winning with 4, something they just haven't been able to do. And it's unfortunate, but you can't stop trying just because it hasn't worked either. And that's my thing with this draft and kind of how they're going about the rest of free agency is I want to see more of an investment in the D line that is realistic because they're not going to spend, again, $30 million or make a D tackle the third highest paid on the market, but show us some more allocation and investment into that position because it doesn't work until it does. And maybe
And
this is the year that they draft someone who actually takes it to a new level and you have what you want and can finally make that change.
I think that's why a lot of people wanted to see a trade because I think they looked at Brandon Beane's track record in the draft in when it came to defensive linemen, and it hasn't been spectacular, right? And so going after a guy that's a proven commodity, proven NFL commodity, elite NFL commodity, maybe was more attractive to people because that then if he comes in and he flops, then it's like, well, then there's something wrong maybe with the coach, whatever the case may be. But like, I do think that's why some people lean towards trade versus draft because the track record for Brandon Beane in drafting defensive linemen has been spotty at best. Like Boogie Basham
Right.
was a bust. AJ Epinesa is solid as a second rounder, but not great. Greg
Yeah.
Rousseau, a triple, I would say. So it's been good, but it hasn't been great, I would say. And so
Mhm.
yeah, we'll see. Like, do we trust him to make the right call in the draft when it comes to the defensive lineman? That's
Yeah.
another question to ask, right? So, yeah, it's all well and good if you draft him, but you got to draft the right guy too. So it's tough.
Uh,
It's the draft is tough.
It is tough. It's a crapshoot, and I totally agree. And I get the frustrations. I'm also of the mindset that, okay, let's say you did make that trade for Myles Garrett and you had to pay Myles Garrett. Now, how does that limit you in other spots? What draft capital did you have to give up? And maybe you got the proven thing, but was that enough individually to shore out the rest of your roster and get you over the hump? Because, yeah, you got one of the best defensive linemen in football, and I'm a huge fan of him. But also, did that make it so that we lost out on maybe getting a top tier corner? Does that make it that now these picks have to fall into later rounds? And even though the Bills have been typically good there, are these players going to be impactful? Are you able to pay free agents in the future decent enough contracts to raise that floor of your team and provide support for that player? There is a risk with something like that too. And also the guy is 30 years old. So you're also wondering, hey, when does the cliff come for him? Because for Von Miller, when they made that signing for him, I believe at the time he was 32 years old. And now here you are a few years later seeing the age catch up to him, and you never know when that cliff is coming for somebody. So it's not to say don't make the move, and I'm not against it. I would have been happy, but rather you do have to keep in mind that everything is a risk, whether it's drafting or making that player. And for me, I don't mind living in a world where you take the swing for the prospects because in turn, if they don't pan out, it's not really costing you much. You get the opportunity to try again without having to do a total rebuild and some really difficult cap decision making. It's, well, this defensive end didn't work out. Let's try again. And hopefully it works this time. And I'm hoping that it works this year. As Richie, again, thank you so much. This is awesome. Like, truly, truly appreciate this. Just frustrated because we're arguably headed into Allen's halfway career mark and we're watching Hurts, Stafford, Foles win Super Bowls before Allen. That's funny. And I get this so much. And, again, it hasn't worked out the way they wanted it to. I don't think it's for a lack of trying, as you said here. And it's just something where they have to get it working in the draft. That's where it's going to stem from. You can make that big trade, you can make that big signing, but you do have to hit the home run like these teams that have been able to win the Super Bowl have been able to do. And the Bills just haven't yet. And can they?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a question that they have to answer. Brandon Beane is not blameless in this matter. He has to prove that his first round pick can be a difference maker, because so far the past, Keon Coleman's not a first round pick, but you look at the other two and Dalton Kincaid and Kyrie Elam, and there's very serious question marks about both players right now. So it has to be better. I agree. And I get fan frustration, but I don't think the frustration
Kyrie Elam's past the point of a question mark, by the way. He's toast.
Yeah. I'm being nice. He's probably gone, but there's work to be done. There's more to prove for Brandon Beane, and I think that's on the way, but will he get it done? Will we actually see that difference maker in the draft? I hope so. That's where I'll leave it. Till, I'll turn it back to you before we get to the final topic of tonight's episode. Any other thoughts on that?
No, let's get to it.
All right, extensions. So a big part of the news cycle for the Buffalo Bills prior to signing their 2 free agents were the extensions that they made in Khalil Shakir, Terrel Bernard, Greg Rousseau, Reed Ferguson, which is obviously the most important one. Shout out to Reed Ferguson. And of course, Josh Allen, who is making record-setting money. All necessary and moves that I approve of, just for the fact that they got to them ahead of the curve and, in my opinion, got great value on every single player, including Josh. What do you think about these moves, David? You can highlight anyone you want of this list, but what were your thoughts on Brandon Beane's approach to these extensions? And do you think more are on the way with either Benford or James Cook?
It's funny because we talk about, do the Bills even have any elite players outside of Josh Allen? And James Cook and Christian Benford might be the two that have the claim to be the closest to being elite outside of Josh Allen. But then you do have to keep your core intact, right? You have Shakir, Bernard, Rousseau and Josh Allen's contract specifically opened up the cap space relief in 2025. Obviously, Bernard and Shakir sort of, in theory, will open up things or reduce the cost that would have been in future years. But all of these are core guys to this team right now. Like Terrel Bernard's a captain. We saw his press conference the other day. I think I haven't had a chance to watch the video yet, but I think they released a video this evening around the behind the scenes on his contract extension. And so to me, it's on the offensive side of the ball, you lock up, you already had Josh locked up, but obviously gets the record and guaranteed money, essentially throws out his 4-year deal that 4 years left he had on his deal, replace it with the new 6-year contract that sets the record for guaranteed money, but still only puts him at 13th AAV when it comes to contract value per year. So kind of a win for both sides, right? Josh gets the guaranteed money, but also gives the Bills flexibility as a team to continue to build around him. He gets Shakir, they're clearly their best receiver in the mix now for future years. Stephon Diggs long gone. Shakir is now their best receiver. That's not even a question in my mind. And then on the defensive side, there were some question marks of whether or not you should or should not have extended Gregory Rousseau. I think the money was right for him. I think it's a fair deal for him. I thought he was going to get closer to maybe $25 million a year, so getting the 20. And what else did you have in the room if you're the Bills? You didn't have anything else. Von Miller's gone. AJ Epinesa is not that dude. He's a good rotational piece. Rousseau is your best defensive end. You had to keep him. You had to. They were in a corner. They had to do it. And then Bernard, as I said, a captain, now kind of leading this defense with the green dot, getting guys in the right spot. His size does concern me a little as far as picking up nagging injuries like we saw this year. But man, the guy plays with heart. He's instinctual and certainly a leader on the team. So all of these make a ton of sense to me. And yeah, happy they all got done before free agency started.
Agreed completely. It's a group that I think everyone was not only well deserving of the payday, but I love the fact that it kind of is a two-way street of you get your money for the value that you've given us. But I think, the thing I really do like about Brandon Beane that I'll always praise him for is how he sets these contracts up where we're going to get you before you really ascend into a value, at least most of the time, before you really ascend into significant value where it becomes more difficult to negotiate and retain you long term. And in turn, we're banking on the next step in your development where if it happens, this deal is of insane value to us, the team. But if it doesn't happen, then the contract is still relative to the production we've been getting from you. So it's not like a total waste of investment or a waste of money. I mean, Ed Oliver kind of set this precedent. They've extended other people, but Ed Oliver's a great example of it, because when they extended him, you were like, yeah, I get it. And this isn't crazy money, so I'm totally on board with this. The year following, he has the best year of his career, and all of a sudden that contract is absurdly good value, and you love it. And now with Khalil Shakir, who I think it just was a great rate to begin with, and I think you're going to get a similar kind of season from him. That's awesome money. Terrel Bernard, in the second year of starting, comes back from some injuries, but played mostly well. I think you got him at a great rate considering what the linebacker market has kind of turned into. Greg Rousseau is my favorite one of the list, because that's a great point you mentioned about, well, he is literally one of the only edge rushers you have left. Please lock him down. But Greg Rousseau, to me, is the most likely to springboard from this deal to someone who is more worth this contract and makes it look even more valuable, because he is 24 years old. He's still developing as a player. He was a massive project, and each year has added incremental steps in his development. And I think, in turn, if you actually address the deficiencies of this defensive line, where you actually do find that nose tackle or one tech, and you find the interior support to really create more pressure, the first person on the outside that's eating off of that is Gregory Rousseau. And he's going to be more productive, and he is going to feast off that, because he already has good numbers when it comes to pressures and pass rush productivity. So it's not like he isn't generating any sort of production there. And you already have the stout defense on the edge as far as run goes. So he's someone I could really see benefiting, at the very least, from that approach to building the D-line, and the Bills will benefit from him blossoming because of that, which is why I think investment in the defensive line is even more paramount this offseason, and something I'm hoping we see both in free agency and the draft. But Reed Ferguson, no, I'm just kidding. Reed Ferguson I'm happy they retained him, and I'm happy that we're past parking lot for Reed Ferguson. He's just a guy.
These long snapper contracts haven't gotten out of control yet.
No. I'm fully expecting, if I'm still doing this show in 2046, the long snapper market turning into like 15 million a year, and it's going to be the funniest shit ever. And we're going to cite this one day and just be like, oh my God, I can't believe it actually got to that point. But I'm a fan of all these deals. None of them scream anything too insane to me. And then the Josh Allen contract, to kind of rework it to be able to have it so that you get the 2 years for him, and you kind of extend his value to give him the contract he deserves, while still making it that the cap hits are more attainable and stretched thinner, I should say, over the long term. It's good. It's good for both parties. And Josh Allen was more than deserving of that. And the Bills got on it now, because you wait another year or two, the value only goes up, even if the salary cap is going up, and even if you have more room. I would rather get on that now and have that number locked down, so that when the cap space increases, you're going to be able to have more flexibility and hopefully be able to still be wide open in free agency and get as many people, players, pieces as you can. But David, I feel like I'm running out of gas here. You got anything else before we sign off for the rest of the night?
No, this has been a good one. Really nice dive into sort of a little bit of a different angle than we took on Air Raid Hour last night. So definitely was a fun conversation. Comment section was feeling it too. So a lot of good opinions there, and good to see some familiar faces as well. Yeah, comment section, they always bring it. So good job, everyone.
They do bring it. Yeah, you guys have been awesome tonight. I appreciate every single one of you checking us out this evening. Before we sign off, before you go anywhere, listen to my spiel about the Cover One insiders, because I want to shout all you guys out that joined us tonight, who were in our Discord, that checked the link out. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you are interested in becoming an insider, then the link to the OnePass sign up page is in the description below. For just 60 Crescent shards, you have an opportunity to become an insider. And I can tell you, we have so much fun speaking to everyone who is a part of this amazing community. That OnePass sign up is the lifeblood of our network, as it allows us to have access to all the resources that we use on a second to second, minute to minute, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year basis for each and every one of you in all of our content, whether that is the videos post produced, whether that is the live shows. All of that content is not possible without each and every one of you. So if you are interested in signing up, go ahead and check that out below. It is well worth your time if you are a Bills fan looking to have more access to our network and to the content we create. Thank you all who have already signed up. And for all of you who checked us out tonight, thank you so much. As Spin leaves, which, by the way, as I've said many weeks, Spin is the devil on my shoulder. Sorry, I'm slacking. I didn't get to roast Joe today. Spin, you're slipping, so I'm going to roast you. Get it together. What the hell is wrong with you? Come on. This is unacceptable.
He got all this roasting on Judge out last night. Maybe that's why he's tired.
This is messed up. I wait for this every week. It's the bright part of the show, and you didn't even bring it this week. You're slipping. You're slipping. I'm losing faith in you. I might trade you for a 6th-round pick, maybe even a 7th if you keep regressing. But all of you, thank you all so much for being here. This was awesome. I had a ton of fun. David, I know they know where to find you, but for the people that might have checked us out after the fact, maybe haven't checked our network out, give them the good word on what you got going on for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, Air Raid Hour right now with me and Judge is Monday nights at 9. We're going to be starting our deep dive in the positional previews for the draft these next several weeks, focusing on areas of need for the Bills. So edge, interior D-line, corner, wide receiver, and we may even sprinkle safety in there as well. So you've got that to look forward to on the Air Raid Hour coming up. And of course, we'll stay in tune with any and all new free agent signings and around the NFL as well. So Monday nights, 9 p.m. And you can get our replay from last night is out now on podcast as well.
Absolutely check them out, guys. Air Raid's an awesome show. Judge and David do amazing work for our network and just in general. You know, great people to follow during these trying off-season times if you want some good perspective and insight on the free agent class, but also the draft class. They do a lot of great work there. The draft content is ramping up over here on Cover One, folks. It's that time of the year. It's Christmas year-round when it's draft season, even though that's not the whole year. But I just love the draft so much, I'm willing to be wrong. And it's going to be ramping up on this show as well. I'm gearing up to do some mock drafts as well as some prospect coverage on the show too. Our network is doing deep dives into everybody. The film room is going to be doing some stuff. I know Greg and Aaron got some stuff planned, so stick around for that. Again, David, thank you so much. For me, you guys can find me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa. I'm here every Tuesday night, 7:30 or 7:35 p.m. to have this show with all of you. I am also now producing for Eric and Anthony on the film room, which is going on every Wednesday. So if you have not checked that out, feel free to check that out. And I may or may not be on the C1 Buff podcast this week, so check that out as well tomorrow night. But everybody, you guys are wonderful. We truly appreciate you. Thank you for making this an awesome show this week. You always do. We'll be back next week, but stay tuned for hopefully more free agency signings and more news on the Bills front. But for us, we will bid you adieu, say goodnight, and as always, go Bills. Take care, everybody.
Go Bills.